this is Chris with Phoenix Gaming. Today we're going to take an introductory look into Age of Sigmar. We're going to talk about why I'm going to be doing some Sigmar videos. We're going to do a brief overview of the game flow and a brief overview of each phase. And one thing is going to be, this is going to be coming from the perspective of a 40k player and even from the perspective of an old fantasy player. I've only played a handful of games of Sigmar. And to be honest with you, early editions like first and second, I was not a big fan. Third edition, I loved the core rules, but I had some issues with the way the battle tomes interacted. But we'll kind of dig into why we're doing this in just a minute. Why, man? You're a 40k player, and you constantly harp on the mortal wound output of 40k. You talk about Sigmar and how you want it to be a separate game, and if you wanted this interaction, you'd play Sigmar. Well, as luck would have it, my 12-year-old daughter has zero interest in 40k. But while I was doing some window shopping on the internet, she saw Lady Olander and was immediately like, Dad, I want that model. Like, I need that model. That model is for me. And so I was like, okay, but this is for a game. I can get you the model. You can build it. You can paint it, but it is for a game. And if you want to learn how to play the game, we can sit and learn. And she's like, well, let me see the army that she belongs to. So I showed her the Nighthaunt line, and she immediately fell in love with all the ghosts and the reapers and everything else. And so I knew right then that whether I wanted to or not, I was going to have to learn how to play this game. And I do want her to enjoy the hobby as much as I do. She's coming from a very different perspective than me. She immediately wanted to learn everything she could about Lady Olander and the Nighthaunt, so she was watching lore videos on YouTube. And I'm not a lore guy, as many of you know. I am a rules and game guy. When I first started 40K, there weren't a ton of books and stuff establishing all this background. It was very much just a game. In third edition, there wasn't a lot of background fleshed out for a lot of things. So she's very much in aesthetics and lore, and I am on the hook for a Lady of Sorrows book, so it is what it is, and I'm learning AoS lore and rules as we go, and I'm gonna share it with you. I will say that Sigmar core mechanics in third edition are actually really good. They're not stratagems, but they're like stratagems, and I can't think of the word for them. But the way they work, the command traits and abilities, it's actually really cool. You can only use them if like the sergeant is attached to the unit. So, and that was another reason why I thought, well, maybe it's time to learn Age of Sigmar. If you've played 10th edition 40k, there's a lot of parallels, and there's a lot of rumors that the Sigmar team actually wrote 40k, which does explain some of the interactions that I absolutely detest and some of the interactions that I really enjoy. But yeah, the core mechanics and rules are great. The way you can layer your rules is actually really cool. You've got your alliance and allegiance, and then your army bonuses and all this other stuff. But it's not overly complicated. It's really easy to kind of pick up and play, but it takes a lot of time to master and really get good at and understand. So I can really appreciate the direction the game has gone. However, I will say that my big issue with AoS is equal to my big issue with 10th edition 40k, and that's like there's a few mechanics that are just really jank. They create very one-sided interactions, and I just don't appreciate them. However, I also understand that no game is perfect, so I'm going to do my best to give it a fair shake as I learn with my daughter. Sigmar turn, overview, brief. We're going to do this pretty quickly. You start the battle round by rolling for priority to see who goes first. You do this every battle round. That can create the dreaded double turn. But honestly, I've played a few games throughout the last couple years, and the double turns really aren't that bad. There's a couple armies that can really punish you for them, but generally speaking, there's things in the game now to help mitigate the power of it. There's some, and again, they're not stratagems, but for our intents and purposes, that's what they are. There's some stratagems that let you interact on your opponent's turn to help kind of move your units if they get caught out in the open or to kind of protect yourself. So it's not as bad as it used to be, and it's not really as bad as it sounds. Once the priority is rolled, the player that one takes their turn, and it follows this flow. You start with the hero phase, the movement phase, the shooting phase, the charging phase, the combat phase, the battle shock phase, and the end of combat or end of battle round. This should look very familiar to most of you because most of the people that are watching my videos are 40k players. The hero phase is just a command phase, guys. And the biggest difference is all your wizards cast in the hero phase in Sigmar, whereas in 40k, when they did cast, we had a separate phase for it. And now casting has just been streamlined into just being ranged attacks and datasheet abilities. That's a different conversation for a different day. The hero phase, we're going to look at it a little bit more in depth. We're not going to get too deep into it. Each player, starting with the active player, can perform one heroic action with a hero, and a heroic action is just a special ability. Again, just know that you can do like one special ability with one of your heroes in your hero phase. Each player receives one command point. The active player can use wizards to cast spells or banish spells or cast endless spells. The active player can use priests to chant prayers, banish invocations, and banish endless spells. So both your priests and your wizards can get rid of endless spells. And before you ask, an endless spell is exactly what it sounds like. It's just an enchantment that you can put on the table. It gets its own miniature and it does its own thing. It's almost like an extra unit for your army. And I will tell you, again, coming from the perspective of a 40k player, every time I see Sigmar models, I think they are the most beautiful models ever. If you have not seen any of the Sigmar endless spell models, you are doing yourself a disservice and you need to go look at them because some of them are amazingly cool. The corn, they're not endless spells, they're the prayers, but there's like a crying skull. It's like a blood tear skull. Go look it up. It is phenomenal. Even if you play World Eaters, I would just have that model for like a display board or something. It is amazing. I will do a follow-up video providing depth and detail to the hero phase, and we'll do more for each phase. Movement phase, this is pretty standard. The active player picks a friendly unit that is not within 3 inches of enemy units and models, and that unit can make a normal move or run. A run is an advance for all you 40k players out there, and a normal move is a normal move. Again, the verbiage is going to be very familiar. You cannot end a normal move or run within 3 inches of an enemy unit. And that's because engagement range in Sigmar is actually 3 inches. Anything within 3 inches is actually within engagement range. It creates a little bit different dynamic, and units have to have a bigger buffer, and your mobility is a little bit different. And it's not bad, it's not good, it's just different. It does take a few games to get used to after playing so much 40k, but once I got used to it, I was like, oh yeah, okay, this is pretty easy. If you are within 3 inches of an enemy unit, you can either do nothing or retreat, and that's just a fallback move, guys. You just move your move in inches, and it must end more than 3 inches away from all enemy units, and it's basically, like I said, you're just taking them and removing them from combat. You cannot shoot or charge if you retreat, and you cannot retreat unless you are within 3 inches. You can move within 3 inches of enemy units during the retreat. You just can't end it within 3. So in order to get out of combat, you can move within engagement range of multiple enemy units as long as that move ends outside of 3. And then you repeat this entire process until you have moved or not moved any of the units you like. Then you go to the shooting phase, and in the shooting phase, you pick a unit with missile weapons. You can check range before declaring targets. Once targets have been selected for your range attacks, you just make your hit rolls, make your wound rolls, and then your target makes armor saves. Again, this is going to be a very familiar process for most of us. This is not a new thing. Repeat the process until all eligible units have shot or not shot. You get to choose. And then this will be covered in more detail in its own video as well. In the charge phase, the active player can pick a friendly unit within 12 inches of an enemy unit and declare a charge. You do not have to declare a target of the charge, guys. You just go, this unit is charging, you roll the dice, and then you measure how far you get to move. And if you can end a charge move within a half inch of an enemy unit, you get to charge into that enemy unit, and you can do it to as many enemy units as you want. It does not matter. If the result is high enough to get within a half inch of an enemy unit, like I said, they can move a number of inches equal to the charge roll. The first model moved must end within the half inch. So you can't do like you used to be able to in 40k and just kind of like start throwing your whole unit all over the place, and then your last model moved is the one that makes the charge. The first one you move has to end within a half inch, and then everything else can be all willy-nilly. After you've made all your charges, you go to the combat phase. The active player selects one unit to fight with. That's it. And you make your attacks. When you make your attacks in the combat phase, it's going to be very similar to making them in the shooting phase. And then the other player selects one unit to fight with, and then you alternate until all eligible units have fought. You cannot opt to not fight. If a unit can make melee attacks, it must. And once all your friendly units have fought, you must then pass. And then once both players pass in succession, which just means once there's nothing left to fight, the fight phase ends. And again, really all that means is everything must fight. If you run out of units, you just sit there and twiddle your thumbs while your opponent continues making attacks until they also run out of units to fight with. The combat phase has a ton of nuance. And again, if you've played 40K, this is a very familiar feeling. The combat phase in 40K, the fight phase, has a lot of nuance and a lot of precision. And it's one that will need its own video. We will need to do a standalone video on it. After we have done combats, we will do a battle shock phase, and then the active player resolves all battle shock tests first. And again, should look pretty familiar to all of us that are coming from 40K. They can be resolved in any order. So if it's my turn, I have to do all of mine first, and I do them in whatever order I want. Any units that have had any model slain must make a battle shock test. And again, if you're coming from 40K, this is just 8th edition leadership. Same exact process. Roll a d6, add the number of casualties the unit suffered to the roll. If the result is less than or equal to your bravery, the test is passed and nothing happens. If the result is greater than the bravery characteristic, the test is failed. If the test is failed, for each point it is failed by, one model is removed from the unit. So for example, if your bravery is 6 and you roll an 8 total, 2 models are removed because 8 minus 6 is 2. After you remove your casualties, you'll check for coherency and split units. And again, that's something that we'll cover in a separate video. And probably when we do the one about movement, and I'm just making fun of my own typo there on the screen. I'm not fixing it. I'm going to share my mistakes with all of you. And that's it. Like, that is basically how a battle round flows in AoS. And like I said, I've gotten to play a couple of quick games with my daughter. Generally, it's been a pretty good time, but we haven't gotten into the nuts and bolts yet. And as we learn more, I will share more, and I will still continue to make my quality 40K content. So don't feel like I'm going to just leave my Drukhari and my Orcs and my Sisters by the wayside. We will still be covering that stuff. I am just going to be working a little bit of AoS in here and there. I will probably be focusing on Sylvaneth and Nighthaunts, as I will have a Sylvaneth army and she will have a Nighthaunt army. And as we both learn more about those armies, I will share with you. Thanks for listening. Big shout out to my immortals, Captain Too Tall, the real Donnie G, and Lord Wellingstone, and Daniel Bodecker. You guys are awesome. You and your support is what allows me to continue to run 40K events for the community. So again, indirectly, you are a big part of why the community gets to keep going and growing. Thanks a lot. And links in the description, links on the screen. Thank you.